and scientists are always trying to falsify current information to reach a better explanation, also known as a paradigm shift. This shift has occurred in many fields of science and is exemplified when exploring the Earth. Geology is the study of the Earth, and many hypotheses have been made and falsified, and we now have obtained a series of factual and reliable knowledge that explain major components in geology. But do we know everything? Nowadays, we know that the Earth is around 4.5 billion years old, and that the first form of bacteria we found in fossils are about 3.5 billion years old. The first multicellular animal fossils are approximately 550 million years old. However, a couple of hundred years ago, there were scientists who were struggling trying to find out how old the Earth was and how it was created. One of these famous scientists was James Hutton. Hutton was born in the year 1726 into a wealthy Scottish family. When he did not find his passion in medicine, Hutton decided to start a farming business. In the year 1768, James Hutton moved to Edinburgh because he got exhausted from the farming lifestyle. He started to keep himself busy with different scientific pursuits. Edinburgh was at the time the main city of intellectual strength. Hutton became a leading member of the famous society called the Caister Club. James Hutton was spending his evenings with other famous scientists of his time. Some of them were the economist Adam Smith and the chemist Joseph Black, as well as philosopher David Hume, and occasional visitors were Benjamin Franklin and James Watt. James Hutton was interested in fields like mineralogy all the way to the field of metaphysics. He also did a few chemical experiments and investigated methods of coal mining and canal building. In addition, he toured salt mines and speculated mechanisms of heredity, but the main thing he did was to collect fossils and propound theories on rain and composition of air, as well as the law of motion. For Hutton, this was so important because he was extremely interested in geology. During his time, the two main questions which scientists were trying to answer were why ancient clamshells and other fossils were on mountaintops, and how on earth did they get there? There were two main groups which had two very different ideas. There were the Neptunists, who believed that shells were on the top of mountains because the sea level used to be a lot higher and the world was covered with water. They thought that mountains were as old as the Earth, and during the global floods, the mountains were covered with water. Then there were the Plutonists, who wondered where all the water would be now that there is no global flooding. They believed that the face of the Earth changes continually because of volcanoes and earthquakes. They were profound of internal forces, but were not capable of explaining how the shells got on the mountains. James Hutton thought about the shells and how they got all the way up on the mountains. He started with looking at his own farmland. He looked at the erosion of rocks and soils and how they got continually washed away by rivers and streams and would get placed somewhere else. Hutton realized that it was a natural process and that the Earth would become smooth gradually. Around him, there were hills, so Hutton thought that there must have been an additional process, some kind of restoration, uplift to create new mountains and hills so the natural cycle can keep going. So the marine fossils would not get on the top of the mountains during the global floods, but would rise with the mountains themselves. There's also heat in the Earth's core, which creates new rocks. Hutton's theory was that this process took place over long periods of time. In the year 1785, he worked on his theory and wrote his ideas in a long paper. He read this paper during the meetings of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Unfortunately, his audience was not able to understand his points. After 10 years of preparing, he finally published his masterwork in the year 1795, A Theory of the Earth with Proofs and Illustration. It was 2 volumes long. After James Hutton died, his Boswell John Playfair rewrote his work. He was not just the Boswell of Hutton, but also one of his close friends, and he understood him. That is why he rewrote Hutton's work. In the year 1802, 5 years after Hutton's death, Playfair produced a simplified description of Hutton's principles. At first, his version did not sell well, but this changed over time. The process of science entails that scientists are always trying to find better explanations. Reverend William Buckland will mostly be remembered as the man who introduced the great geologist Lyell to the field, but he had other contributions for the relatively young science. The Englishman was one of the pioneers of the Geological Society and one of the first men to do field work, searching the countryside for geological evidence, the so-called stone breaking. He is mostly known for his interest in fossils and discovering one of the first dinosaurs. Another major contributor to the science of geology is Buckland's fellow countryman, Dr. James Parkinson, who was a social and political reformer who later returned his interest to geology. After contributing to the founding of the Geological Society, he published a book called The Organic Remains of the Former World, which is considered the first attempt to give a familiar and scientific account of fossils. Another man who supplied the science of geology with valuable information was the Scottish Roderick Murchison. He introduced a new geological period and system called the Silurian, which helped to characterize rocks at certain periods of time. Because of his extreme devotion to geology, Murchison cut off all his ties with his friend Reverend Adam Sedgwick, after the former claimed the rock belongs to the Silurian period, while the latter insisted that it belongs to the Cambrian period. This conflict was called the Great Devonian Controversy, and shows that not all the theories of geology were developed smoothly and without any controversy. As mentioned before, another scientist tried to explain the field of geology even further. Charles Lyell was born the year that Hutton died. He was Scottish by birth, but lived in Hampshire in the south of England. Like many other geologists, he came from a wealthy family. He was greatly influenced by Buckland and went touring with him in Scotland, which sparked Lyell's devotion to geology. He became a professor of geology at King's College and published a book called The Principles of Geology in the 1830s. During this time, a great controversy arose between two groups, similar to that of the Neptunists and Plutonists. This argument was between the catastrophists and uniformitarians about how and why changes on the Earth occurred. The catastrophists, as implied by the name, believed that the Earth was shaped by cataclysmic events, such as floods. Sometimes they are mixed up with Neptunism because of this belief. This idea was comforting for people like Buckland, as it allowed them to incorporate biblical events like the flood of Noah in scientific theories. The uniformitarians believed that changes on Earth were gradual and took an extremely long time to occur. Lyell was a uniformitarian, yet he failed to explain how mountain ranges were formed. He didn't believe in the Ice Age. Instead, he believed that principal animal groups had coexisted from the dawn of time. In this, Lyell would be proven wrong due to the theory of extinction.
But how do we know it's an ice age? Because of all the ice!
We mentioned earlier the argument when geologists tried to divide the history of the Earth through rocks, the Great Devonian Controversy. Lyell, in his The Principles of the Earth, tried to divide geological time. He proposed units known as epochs or series, which only apply to the most recent 65 million years. Among these epochs were the Pleistocene, most recent, Pliocene, more recent, Miocene, moderately recent, and Oligocene, but a little recent. This was meant to cover the period since the age of the dinosaurs. Nowadays, geological time is divided into four chunks known as Precambrian, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. These chunks are then divided into several subgroups. After the question of geological periods occurred, people started to speculate about the age of the Earth. Lyell was the first to question the age of the Earth. Everyone thought the Earth was young before his book, The Principles of the Earth, was published. But the question was, how old was the Earth? Edmund Halley was one of the scientists interested in examining the age of our planet. His suggestion was to divide the total amount of salt in world seawater by the number added each year, in order to know the age of the oceans and thus knowing the age of the Earth. His experiment wasn't successful because no one was able to figure out the amount of salt in seawater. In 1859, Charles Darwin declared in his book on the origin of species that a geological process that created Weald, an area south of England, has taken 300 million years to be established. This was his first attempt to discover the age of the Earth, yet was met by a lot of disapprovals that Darwin had to withdraw it from the third edition of his book. Darwin was then followed by Lord Kelvin, one of the greatest and most intelligent scientists of that time. Lord Kelvin was born in 1824. Kelvin was known for his contributions in the field of thermodynamics, electrodynamics, and the wave theory of light. Of all his success in science and mathematics, Kelvin's only weakness was in his ability to calculate an accurate estimate of the age of the Earth. At first, he proposed that Earth existed for 98 million years, then the figure fluctuated between 20 million and 400 million years. Kelvin tried to go through his estimates several times, but he wasn't successful. Amazing how a simple question like, how old is the Earth, can spark so many different theories, arguments, and paradigm shifts. Despite this, we still can't just stop trying to explain the world further. There is always a better explanation and something new to learn in the process of science.